To answer that is super complex, and I don't know all of it, but I know a big factor that brings us back to Charlie Kirk is his role in the culture wars and his job of recruitment and reinforcing of the moral standards of the right by using those culture wars to galvanize and build consensus with their base. And this is most prominent through the media. Today, that is YouTube and podcasts, but for a while, it was TV and radio. And that's where the foundation lies, in media manipulation. And to understand that, you have to start with good old Satan himself, Ronald Wilson Reagan, 666. This man is undefeated in how often something bad comes back to him. In this situation is the 1987 ending of a policy called the Fairness Doctrine. You may have heard right-wing pundits at times try to make this seem like this doctrine would silence them and make it so they wouldn't be able to have the right to be on air, but that's not really accurate. The end result probably would change the way that all politics are discussed in media. But what the Fairness Doctrine really was making media companies more responsible for the type of topics they covered on air. Essentially, you couldn't have something like Fox News before the 1980s, and the same could be said for MSNBC. Because the Fairness Doctrine basically said that if you have opinions of a political or controversial nature, you have to have both sides of that opinion. And they have to be presented in an earnest and direct manner, unless you can legit get fined by the FCC. Thus, it was hard to use media to exclusively promote any political agenda. There was political discourse in media before then, but it was much more measured and straightforward, more educational, and far less entertaining. Hence the many TV broadcast interviews of political figures, even radical ones like a Malcolm X. With the Fairness Doctrine gone, our politics became another framework for just being entertainment, just as subject to media manipulation and sensationalism in the name of ratings and marketing versus education and seeking the truth. Today, our political media looks more like something from Monday Night Football or professional wrestling, and entire networks of channels can push explicit and clear political agendas. And now there are large groups of Americans who only get their news from overtly biased sources. And no, this video is not sponsored by Ground News, but it is sponsored by Nebula. We can talk about that real quick. Ground News shade notwithstanding, the point is that having a balanced intake on what political opinions you bring in pretty much started to die at that point. And then it got even worse because of one more thing. Reagan isn't the only villain here. You all know I'm bipartisan in my hatred of America's political apparatus. The next major factor is the Telecommunications Act signed by Bill Clinton in 1996.
Today, with the stroke of a pen, our laws will catch up with our future. We will help to create an open marketplace where competition and innovation can move as quick as light. An industry that is already 1/6 of our entire economy will thrive. It will create opportunity, many more high-wage jobs, and better lives for all Americans.
Among many other things, what this mainly did was allow for unchecked corporate ownership of media companies, resulting in massive mergers until only a few companies own all of what is seen or heard on our screens and airwaves. So now you have companies like the far-right leading Sinclair Media owning most local TV stations in the country and purposely seeding right-wing perspectives into their coverage and being blatantly manipulative in their efforts to control media narratives, as seen in this horrifying but real clip of their many news stations reading the same script.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things that simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
So with these two things in place, we now have the environment set for people like a Charlie Kirk to wield immense power in pushing cultural narratives and swaying public and political influence. They just didn't quite know it yet. And Kirk comes in the late 2010s, but he's following in a tradition of right-wing talking heads, normalizing certain far-right talking points. And here's where we meet the most important character in the history of the culture wars, and possibly one of the most influential political figures to never hold an office, Rush Limbaugh.
Folks, there's actually a debate going on ESPN and throughout the sports world over who can use the N-word, when, and how. The white race has probably had fewer slaves and for a briefer period of time than any other in the history of the world.
What are the similarities between the Democrat Party of today and the Nazi Party?
Rush Limbaugh is greatly responsible for today's political reality. There is no Trump, no Fox News, probably no manosphere, and definitely not a modern culture war without him. He is patient zero for the awful timeline we're in right now. Ironically, Limbaugh was the failed son of a prominent political family whose only talent was yapping at a time where that talent only had one medium to be successful, which was radio. And Limbaugh loved radio and worked in it on and off growing up until he got to college. And then he dropped out of college to focus on being a DJ full time in his early 20s and was not very successful until he found his calling as a right-wing provocateur. And this wasn't a new thing for American radio at the time, but to give the devil his due, Limbaugh was extremely talented as an orator.
Barney admitting that he had had an affair with Stephen Goby, and he said, quote, "I was just trying to help this guy through some problems, but I got suckered. That's what drove me to My Boy Lollipop. My Boy Lollipop." Perfect. It was absolutely perfect. I don't think that that is making fun of the homosexual lifestyle.
Because of the Fairness Doctrine and the Telecommunications Act, the value of his voice skyrocketed and spread throughout the nation. In his book, Talk Radio's America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States, Brian Rosenwald explains how, with the Fairness Doctrine gone, radio stations learned to streamline their content for market optimization, making all-day conservative talk shows a strong branding strategy, partially due to the fact that newer FM radio was clearer